the last sessions, one or two last sessions before lunch. So we're going to move on to, and this was a slight shift in the program from this morning, we're now going to talk about empowering the role of the company secretaries to translate board decisions into a feasible action plan. So Abdul Aziz, if you could come up and just say a few words about yourself and the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is Abdul Aziz. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning to everybody. I'm coming from a travel industry. It's like the Sabre, where our work is an American-based reservations. They own the reservation system. They provide all kind of online solutions to the travel industry. So our customers are airlines, travel agencies, hotels, car rentals, rail, everybody who's involved either in travel directly or hospitality business. It's an American company, and we formed about 8 years ago a joint venture in Bahrain, which has become our Middle East headquarters, and we have operations all over the Middle East that is controlled from Bahrain. We have offices everywhere. We are pretty much in the very busy operation these days. Only in Bahrain we own the 90% of market share of this industry. So it's a very busy work. That busy work is involved into that actually attracts the other problems, which is mostly comes from the board, because the board of our company is not resident mostly in Bahrain. So they are the Sabre people and the joint venture, because this is a joint venture with Gulf Air. So there are a couple of Gulf Airs, and then a few of them come from either Dallas or London. So this is not only making a problem of administration, how to run the board meetings, but another problem from the operational side is the conflicts. The conflicts come because the two different shareholders bring the different psyche to the board, different attitude, and different perspective, which is sometimes not really synchronized to each other. And that creates a kind of a decision-making problem for the operators. This is what our topics, and before we go into the topic, let's see who are our stakeholders into the whole situation here. The board of directors, of course, is the one who leads the activities, who directs the people, and their responsibility is to oversee the entire operation of the company. While the CEO of the company is actually responsible directly to implement the board's decisions into their organization. The senior management, as it is, they are running the actual show of the company under the supervision and the leadership of the CEO. They are responsible to carry on and implement of the goals and the strategies that the board is looking for and directing and implementing through the CEO. And of course, the company secretary in this whole situation is neither implementing anything, he's not taking any decisions, but he's the one who's responsible in between to make sure that the decisions are actually being implemented. The governance part is the whole load of this governance is rested on the company secretary. Now, what decisions that we are talking about? Generally, the board come up with 4 different type of decisions in the board meetings. Either they are strategic, tactical, operational, or the administrative. Let's see what are the tactical decisions, strategic decisions. They are broad, they are long-term. They generally provide a guideline for what actually shape the company into the future. It leads the company towards the common objective of achieving more profitability and expanding the business into the territory where they are operating. These are generally very important, very risky decisions, because if the strategy doesn't work, then it whole blame goes to the board. So when the board takes the decisions of these kind of strategies, then they utilize their entire capacity of their wisdom and knowledge and the experience they employ into this organization. They take the decisions of the large investment that gives return into going forward and not immediately. The other technical decisions are basically these are the decisions where how to implement those strategies. They are also equally important, but they are a bit less risky because they are still under the framework of the strategies that is defined by the board themselves. The other operational decision is to how to run the operation on a day-to-day basis. This is the management responsibility. But the management goes to the board anytime that when they feel that certain things are exceeding their authority limits, so they require board's decision to sort out whether they are in line with what they are looking for or not. I cannot clearly distinguish between the operational decisions and the administrative decisions, because administrators, like any administration of the company, like adding a new signatory into the banking authorities place, this is pretty much administrative, but somehow it's linked to the operations as well. So these are both operational and administrative decisions. Generally, the management takes this decision, but whenever they need the board to interfere or give them the authority to take over, because sometimes they don't have the delegation to carry on certain decisions. That's why these decisions go refer back to the board, and they do that. Now, in the decisions, whatever has been taken in the boardroom, there have to be some disagreements. But disagreements usually sorted out during the board meeting. I've been in the board for about more than a decade, in one company to another company. And what I feel generally when the board leaves, if it is a small company, it's a family-owned, and decisions usually happen outside of the board meeting. If it is a joint venture, then they tend to resolve those within the board meeting and not carrying on outside. The problem comes between the board and the management. It's not within the board members, because board members generally works in a harmony and reach to the decisions which they should be during the board meeting. If not, then the board is the one that decides for the majority. So that when the decision is happening, but the decision sometimes leading management into a discomfort position. There are three parties in this involved into the whole thing, and that become a triangle between the board, CEO, and the management. Like I said, CEO is the one who has he has responsibility to run the company under the direction, supervision, the wide vision of the board. But then at the same time, he has to carry on his senior team also, because they are the ones who are actually working. CEO is not the one who's actually involved into day-to-day operation. He oversees them. But the senior management is the one who actually run the company. And if they are not really convinced with the board decision, then it becomes a problem of the conflicts, the disagreements that leading towards how to implement those decisions. This is what we're going to discuss here, because there are usually, if the management doesn't agree, then what happens? They either delay the implementation or they just implement this just as a form of ticking off, and they don't care whether it is properly implemented or not. It's like it's a human nature, I can say, when somebody is disagreed and nobody trying to resolve those disagreements, then if they cannot avoid it, they just get it out of its way. The delay is usually when the management thinks that the board is not taking a right decision. What they try to do in general, which I see in my career, that they generally try to delay it as much as possible. So if they know that over a period of time, it will be completely evident that the board's decision was not really right. So delaying can lead to proving to the board that whatever vision they are carrying is lacking some sort of operational issues, where it's easy to say something, but how to implement that can carry out consequences of that. So this is one way of just not to accept board's decisions, because they don't have authority to say, I can't do it. So it's just delaying it to the point that it automatically proves itself that the decision was not really 100% correct. And there are various ways of doing it. That's form a committee to review the consequences, just have a series of meetings with the department to, it can be named anything like we're trying to building a consensus before we go for the actual implementation, or just hire a consultant and we'll take ages to finish anything. Another form of doing it is implementing, but just to take off the requirement of implementing. So it's pick a familiar element, divide the whole thing into various stages, and say, okay, we are implementing stage number 1 and see what is the outcome, and then we go for the second and third stage, or the various stages. And because it's a half-hearted approach, that I personally feel that it is more dangerous than the one that before we talk about not implementing it. If non-implementation it can preventing having those visions implemented that the board is actually looking for. But implementing improperly is actually deviating the actual goal that the board is looking, and maybe it could go into the wrong direction. This is a blame game start after that. So in some cases, I mean, the management doesn't do usually, but sometimes people just misinterpret the whole thing, either unintentionally or intentionally, and then implement the way they feel that it should be. Now, who is the person who solved this whole thing? In the middle, we have our own beloved company secretary. The person who is not supposed to do any implementation, but he's the one who administered the whole implementation. The corporate governance the heavy cap that rested on company secretary, putting him into the middle of this whole crisis situation. It's his role to effectively administer the journal and the board meetings. It is ensuring the compliance, regulatory and statutory bodies, and then also ensuring that the board decisions are implemented, although he's not implementing. This is a situation where most of us as a company secretary come across one time or another, or sometimes many times during our career, where the management is not agreeing to what the board is telling, but then the company secretary has to make sure that these decisions are implemented. Why company secretary? Company secretary has a long list of job description. If I start narrating everything, then it goes into 2 pages sometimes. But I'm picking up the one that is relevant to our topic right now. It's ensures corporate governance. It's the major one that is actually putting him directly in charge of why or how to implement those decisions where the management is having concerns. And the board decisions legal framework, this is another topic. We will just go into the detail and later. And then you need to make sure the management understands responsibility towards the organization. Corporate governance. When you combine the 3 things together, the accountability, transparency, and the corporate controls, they form actually a general umbrella for the good corporate governance, good effective corporate governance. And that is the company secretary is automatically, directly responsible for the corporate governance of the company. The decisions when the board takes, it's not necessary that they are actually familiar with every aspect surrounding the decisions. Sometimes they are the non-executive, they are coming from the different organization, they just come and attend the board meetings. And they are not really very familiar with the business also. So they're not very familiar of the business requirements sometimes, legal framework mostly, and they just come up with the ideas, and that sometimes ideas are very good also. But for example, if like in my company, we are involving in training of our customer also, because our system is a high-tech system and we keep on changing. It's not available generally in the market. So it's our responsibility to train our customer how to use the system. Now sometimes, I know the board, not really the board, but the management thinks that why don't we just go and have a training institute, because we have developed a breed of trainers who are actually going into the market and training, and they are very effective in that. So why don't we we initiate an institute and thus making money out of that institute as well. The board, if the board comes with this kind of requirement, then its company secretary to step in and tell them that, look, there are several ways of doing it, but not really, you cannot just decide and go from tomorrow starting an institute, training the customers. First of all, you need to see that your memorandum of article association doesn't permit those kind of activities. So it's at this the advice that you have is actually beyond the scope of the company. So we need to, if you really want to dig into that, then we need to involve, first of all, legals to make sure that we are actually authorized to carry on those activities into this particular territory. And if that we are authorized, then we need to engage the shareholders also, if they are willing to expand the scope of the company as well. So these are the decisions which is beyond the control or beyond the jurisdiction of the board as well. So the company secretary comes to step in between, and he ensures that the board understands that what are the consequences of their decisions, number one, and if their decisions have the legitimacy when we put into the practice. This has to be sorted out during the board meeting, or if not, then he can park it and come back later to the board that what are the issues surrounding those decisions. And this decision has to be sorted out before we take it to the management for any implementation, creating any plan for the implementation. The management, once the decisions are sorted out, what management has to understand that what is their liability toward boards and its decisions. Regardless whether they agree or not agree, it's their responsibility to implement those decisions once they are taken and debated thoroughly during the board meetings. And everybody is agreeing because the board is actually representing mostly the shareholders' vision in the company's portfolio. And not only the liability towards the board, but the management has a liability towards the organization as a whole also. There are delegations given, there are tasks given, there are reasons for them to be in the organization. And one of the reasons is to work closely towards the corporate's growth. And if the board coming up with the idea with all their knowledge and the wisdom and the capacity, then management has to first understand the concept behind that, rather than just disputing on that. So it's the company secretary's responsibility that management also understand that what is their liabilities towards the management, towards the board and towards the company itself. And at the end, the management also should understand the consequences of just not complying those requirements. After understanding what is the board, what is the relationship between the board and the management, CEOs, and what type of decisions we've taken and how the conflicts arises into that, we can talk in detail about how to implement those decisions. So the decisions are generally two types. One that have no disagreement, is plain, board gives a mandate and management have to implement those decisions. And the other ones who have the management disagreement or the concerns on that. The approach is pretty much the same. One is light, the other one is a bit severe. But if there is no agreement, there's no disagreement, then the work is pretty much easy for the company secretary. But still, because he is responsible for make sure that the decisions are implemented, and he need to simply create a template, something like an action item or the executive summary, which he can talk to them, which he can show or give to the management, distribute to the respective people, and then set up a plan that when they will be meeting. It's a regular follow-up that required to make sure that things are being done and the time frame that is suggested to them. But if there is a disagreement, then the approach will be a little bit different. It's not simply circulating an action plan and arranging meetings and talking and follow-up. The company secretary has to take a full control of the situation. This is unfortunate, but that he put into the situation, he has to put himself into the situation where he take control of the situation and make the management understand what is their liability. Generally, if I take my own role into that, I don't go as a policeman. on behalf of the board. I'll just go as a facilitator. The approach is to facilitate and make the management understand various things surrounding on the decisions. Just sort of making a list of them is the first step towards taking control of that. And then we need to distribute the various timelines to the management, when and how and on what dates they have to finish this up. Then there has to be a series of meetings with the management. The intention is that management should understand that somebody is closely monitoring the implementation. It's not like they have to do it, next board meeting maybe 4 months away, so they have all the time to gain those times. Now there is somebody who's sitting there regularly, properly monitoring what they are doing and checking them and chasing them for reaching to the milestones it's set under them. The management, and as I mentioned before, that as a corporate governance head, the company secretary always have the responsibility towards the management to make them understand that what is the importance of the governance into the organization, why this has to be implemented in there, why management has to carry on their task and responsibility with all the due diligence that they have. The management has to understand their liability. The management has to understand their liability towards the board and towards the organization side. And if that requires separate sessions, then the company secretary has to do it. Otherwise, they can talk in the general meeting. He needs to arrange. Sometimes you need to sit one-to-one with the management and to sort out why they have the disagreements on various issues. And at the end, you need to have a firmly agreed reporting line. There has to be a consensus developed. Without consensus, it will be a half-hearted approach to implement and just get it out of its way. So that is, like I said before, I find it more complicated and more dangerous than just not implementing it all from the beginning. So we should not reach to a situation where management feels that just finish it up because somebody is monitoring, so just take it out and get it out of its way. The management need to understand that this is their liability, their responsibility, and they have to deliver. And that's how they come up with the deadlines or the reporting line or the action lines, which is really feasible for the operation as well. Once we establish the report line, we need to identify who's actually the person responsible. Although this is the job of the management to put a proper action plan for how to implement those decisions for any project that needs to start. There are a number of people involved into that. So the senior management has a responsibility to allocate to right people for the project, to put the right and reasonable deadlines for implementing various aspects of the decisions. The company secretary only has to make sure that these all things have been done. So he needs to make sure that management is really seriously taking up the project, and they are taking steps towards implementing this in the right way. So if the company secretary has a right to ask the management and what they are doing actually for that, in the separate meetings or the periodic meetings, he actually go and see from the management that where they're progressing towards this whole thing. Its company secretary also has a responsibility to understand the consequences of various action items that are not really operational feasible. There is a possibility that when we start any project, we don't see all the aspects of the risk involved or associated to the project. Sometimes it happens when we put the project into the place, into the action, into the operation, and gradually we come across into various bottlenecks. Now, if bottlenecks are purely operational, that requires some more efforts or different effect or a different way of doing it, then it's a management issue to do it. But the company secretary should be aware, because there is a possibility, because of those bottlenecks or operational hiccups, the projects will be delayed. So he needs to go and report to the board that why and where the problem lies with those implementation, and why this can't be implemented, or we or why they are not implemented within the time frame given to them. Regular monitoring is, again, it's not policing. There's a difference between the regular monitoring and just policing. The company secretary is not an auditor. The company secretary is a corporate governance head. So we need to ensure that the policies and procedures are in place and people are following them. There are systems in place that is ensuring the governance in place. He is not the one who go and check every document like an auditor. He is the one who makes sure that there is an audit in place and they are doing the job effectively. So the reporting is being done in time. The management is taking actions which is leading towards the implementation of the rightful decisions. He not necessarily sit into every meeting and sort out whether they are doing it or not, but he just needs to know whether it is happening or not. So the regular monitoring of the progress is the crust of this whole thing that is called implementing the plans. And at the end, we all understand the fundamentals. We know that the role or responsibility of the company secretary changes from where we come into company because of the complexities involved into the company. Sometimes the company secretary is wearing several hats, like me, I'm heading the finance as well at the same time, strategic planning. And when combining the two together, sitting in the board and giving a presentation as well, how impartial I am in the company secretary's role is the organization, the structure itself will tell. So if my job is secured with a board decision only, then I will be very much impartial. If my job is rested with the CEO's decision, then I'll probably be tending towards, not really towards the board. So the organization itself has a responsibility and the board has a responsibility to make sure the company secretary is independent. And independency is the one that is securing or ensuring the governance. If the company secretary is working under, if generally they are directly reporting to the board, but if they are assuming some other roles also in the organization, then they are part of the management at the same time. That becoming a conflict of interest involved into that. Not everybody is as honest and good as Mr. Lakshman is, but we all have the personal issues into that. So that there is a conflict of interest, then the only thing, with my opinion, is securing the company secretary is that the decision of his employment is rested with the board and not with the upper management of the company. And then the active company secretary become an active effective company secretary also. If he has no fear of the job, and then if he is carrying some other caps also, and then he can ensure that he is independent, then he become fully functional and become a board's arms and legs and eyes and ears into this organization. And he become a source of advice and counsel to the directors and the management with an anticipation to meet the needs of the board. That is what is very important, and that is making company secretary is the right person to ensure that the board decisions are implemented. And he will be the one who really assists the board to achieve an appropriate balance between the performance and conformance, to ensure that the papers submitted to the board and meet the board requirement as well. Therefore, I believe the company secretary, if not directly, but they indirectly plays a very vital role in implementing the feasible plan into the action. And that's what it is these days. It's very challenging. The company secretary, like I said in the beginning, they are not directly responsible for implementing the plan, but as an administrator, they have indirect responsibility to make sure that they are the one who, their actions are the one are actually implemented. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions on that? Well, maybe I'll kick off with a question. So what you've described in terms of management implementing the decisions of the board raises a very important point, because you've obviously focused on the part that the company secretary plays in that, but also it comes into the dynamics between the board and the chief executive and the management team. And I've seen two situations. I've seen one where we've had a very dominant chief executive and a very weak board, and the chief executive was playing a very large part in just bulldozing what he wanted through. And I've seen the opposite, where we've had a weak chief executive and a very, very strong dominant chairman and a strong board. And it was in the second case that was interesting for me, because the chief executive did not agree with some of the strategic decisions that the board were making. These were very big decisions of strategy, of which countries to go into, of what to do in those countries. And my advice to the chief executive was, if you are fundamentally not in line with the strategy of the board, then you have a choice. You must either go to the board and articulate your case, why you think they're wrong, and try to get them to change their mind. Or you must simply accept their decision and you must implement it. But if you can't do either of that, then you should resign. Because if you don't resign, then the board will sack you. So the board sacked him 3 months later. And I don't think a chief executive has a choice to sit on decisions or to not implement or be belligerent and not accept the decision of the board. A properly functioning board will force its decisions through. It will happen. So the part that I, as company secretary, play in that is, you're right, it's as facilitator. I don't take responsibilities for the decisions, and if the chief executive is not fulfilling what he's supposed to be doing under the board mandate, then my route is through the chairman of the board to say, the chief executive is not producing the actions that you're asking him to produce, and if the board should properly challenge the status of the actions at every board meeting, and they should be able to see for themselves if the chief executive or the management team is not fulfilling their actions. And if they don't, if I put in action, I put in a timetable. So if at a board meeting I say, the board resolved that the chief executive would produce such and such a report by the next board meeting, it's then an action on the chief executive to do that. And if he doesn't do that, it's very clear for the board that he hasn't done it, and the chief executive will need to explain. And there may be good reasons why. But I think that the idea that you have a sort of belligerent, difficult chief executive stalling for time, the boards that I work for wouldn't tolerate that for a minute.
You're right. Generally, the board don't tolerate on that for a very long time. They need to see the results. The results are delivered. So their direction towards the management is pretty much straightforward, and they see the action has been taken and the results are delivered. Company secretary, like I said before, is a facilitator in this whole situation. He's in the middle. He doesn't play the game, but he is a referee kind of situation. So it is his, if not directly, but then indirectly, he should be taking up this responsibility to act as a facilitator and to resolve the conflicts. The resolution of conflicts can be either helping them to come up with an argument to the board and take it to the board and trying to convince to the board that as good as the decision looks like, but then operationally we have a hell of complications in implementing that. And that it can require maybe a lot of investment, or maybe it's not a long-term vision. It's not, because probably the company has no no long-term feasibility for this project, or maybe they don't see the market to be acting as the board see that. So this matter has to be resolved between the board and the CEO and the senior management. Or if the management is not understanding, or the management is adamant of not just taking, then there is no other way of just taking the whole situation to the board and telling them that this is not happening. That would be the worst case scenario, I think. But I didn't see in my career mostly apart from occasionally 1 or 2 times that I need to take this thing to the board and say to them, guys, that's not happening. But mostly the time, I myself take up the charge of the situation and go and trying to convince the management that this is their liability to do it. If I'm convinced, or the management is convinced themselves that this is not the right way of doing it, it's not in favor of the company, then we help them, and I help them in creating a proper case to take it to the board and then convince the board. The situation where the conflict is not resolving is not healthy neither for the board or the management or the company, because board at the end is the board, is the supreme authority of the company. They can just sack the management and go. So the management should understand that what are the consequences of they not implementing or sitting on the decisions.
Are there any other? Sir, yes.
Yes, thank you very much. Just a quick question. Here it says monitoring progress of previously executed plans and budget to ensure board's obligations are fulfilled. Now, in my experience, we don't really interfere in the execution of the plans or the monitoring of the budget. So I wanted to ask you, can you probably shed some more, just quickly shed some more light on how you are doing this in your experience?
Yeah, like I said before, that company secretary is not an auditor, but as a head of leading the corporate governance, then he needs to make sure that things are being done properly and as they are mandated to the management. It's a bit different from doing audit. And monitoring doesn't mean that they need to go and check where they are exceeding the budget or the authority given to them. They need to ensure that there is a system in place that is ensuring that the management is working according to the guidelines provided to them. So for example, if budget, for taking example, the budget only, if the budget has been approved, like every year, board approves the budget and budget goes. But there are instances where the budget has a variance also. When we go along here, then we see the expenses are overriding the budget sometimes. We have negative variances. But there has to be a system in place where the management takes this to the board and tell them that these are the reasons for the overriding the budgeted amounts. If it is happening on a quarterly or on a regular periodical basis, then it means the system in place. The board knows what's happening in the organization, and board knows what are the reasons that is leading the organization to exceeding to the powers given to them. If the board this is only the responsibility of the company secretary. He cannot go and ask why it's happening. It's just make sure that whatever is happening is board is aware of that. That's the difference between the monitoring and audit.
Any more questions? Right, well, thank you very much indeed. That was great. Okay, we now move on to our next and final presentation before lunch, which is the Company Secretary as a standalone advisor, ensuring audit and internal control are in place and executed. So if I could ask Anna Saraf to